right. This will be our last teaching session, and well, as it turns out, it's the last session of the day anyway. So we may not get to the discussion, except for the discussions that we've had on the side here. So now let's cover Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther. Okay? But let's bridge the gap. First we have to bridge the gap. We left off with the exile, which took place in 586. The final exile. Assyria sent the northern kingdom of Israel in 722 BC. Assyria took the northern kingdom in 722. Babylon and her allies destroyed Assyria in 605 BC. Babylon sent Judah into exile in 586 BC. Okay, that was with King Zedekiah and all that. And Judah was exiled in Babylon until the Babylonian exile, yes?
No, I'm just...
Oh. Daniel is a great book to bridge the gap between 2nd Chronicles and 2nd Kings with Ezra. Okay? Daniel is a fantastic book of history to bridge that gap. So media, now here's been the interesting thing. If you notice, Assyria was the first great empire over here. And Assyria had Babylon and Persia and Media under their control, and they also had Egypt under their control. Okay? Then Babylon, who is further east, had Assyria and their allies in Persia and Media under their control, as well as Egypt under their control. But what happens during the exile is that Persia and Media start to become the kingdom, and then they defeat Babylon and Assyria and Egypt. And they're the ones who push all the way into Europe and start picking on the Greeks. Okay? So, but Media and Persia came and defeated Babylon in 538 BC. On the spreadsheet I sent you, I have it as 539 BC. Because that's what the scholars were saying. Others say 538. I don't care. You put 539, put 538, doesn't matter to me. These are all circa dates anyway. Maybe it was 532. Maybe it was 541. I don't know. But Judah, after Babylon fell to Persia and Medo-Persia, now the Jews were under exile in the Medo-Persian Empire, which is not the same as being in exile under Babylon. And the Promised Land, meanwhile, has been in ruins this whole time. Okay? You have scattered peoples living there. Babylon came in and decimated the place. The temples burned down. The walls of Jerusalem are burned down. Jerusalem just is a place where it's rubble. And it's not going to be... If you have a choice between living in a town that is built up versus living in a town that is rubble, you're going to live in the town that's already built, and so Jerusalem's just sitting there in shambles. Okay? Well, first of all, who is Ezra? Ezra is an exile in Babylon. He's in the city of Babylon under the Persian Empire, under the control of Persia. Nebuchadnezzar is long dead. He's also a priest from the line of Aaron. He's in the same line as that of Zadok. Okay? He's also a scribe, which means he's incredibly learned. Yes, he can write down a copy. He's a copyist of writing an old document and then writing it to a new one. He can do that. But he's also a great teacher of the law. Okay? But he does a great job. You notice he and Nehemiah both do a great job of preserving all these old letters and old correspondence. He's also a leader. He is highly respected by King Artaxerxes. King Artaxerxes is a Persian king, and he reigned somewhere between 465 and 424 BC. He's going to play a part in both Ezra and Nehemiah's ministries. Okay, so that's Ezra. So first of all, Ezra in his book, he's going to give a recap of what happened until he gets on the scene. So he talks about it at the first return. Babylon fell to Medo-Persia, and well, I don't really need to get into all this other stuff. I'm going to skip it. But in Cyrus, who became king of of Persia in his first year as king, which was around 535. Not everybody's going to agree with me because I use Xenophon as the source of my historical data, but it doesn't matter. But in 535, he sent them back to Jerusalem. He said, everybody, that, just like we read at the end of 2 Chronicles, anybody that wants to return to Jerusalem to rebuild the temple, let them do so. And so they returned in 535 to Jerusalem to do that. And Ezra is talking about that time. He's saying, and they did it at that time. That happened before Ezra gets on the scene. There's a good Google. You can go to YouTube and Google 2Gab. Actually, I've got a. If you want to click that link, you can see a video on this issue here of who's Darius in the book of Daniel and all that kind of stuff and the history of that. If you want to do such a thing. But the 70-year period of the exile that began in 605 when Daniel first went, ended in 535, 70 years later. Okay. All right, so, but Ezra makes the point that God stirred the heart of Cyrus to do this thing, to go back to Jerusalem. It's even mentioned in the book of Isaiah. God says that he's going to use him. And so Ezra provided a copy of what the decree that Cyrus had written. It's provided for us in 2 Chronicles, and it's also provided for us in Ezra chapter 1. But the point that Cyrus had is, go rebuild the temple. He didn't say anything about rebuilding the city, and certainly they do not rebuild the city. They go there, and the first thing they're going to work on is the temple. So Cyrus sent back also the old articles of the temple. People gave free will gifts. He gave state funds also to fund the rebuilding of the temple. But the ark is not mentioned as one of the things that came back, because the ark was not one of the things that was taken. Ezra also lists the people that returned. Everyone could have returned, but most people did not. Some priests that were going to return were allowed to return, but they weren't allowed to be priests because their lineage was uncertain. They didn't have it written down. Ezra's very excited about the lineage. He wrote the genealogies of 1 Chronicles. So,
this is really interesting stuff, too.
Yeah, it is. But you can imagine this scribe, Ezra. He's got these records, and he's like, I've got it all right here. Ooh, I'm going to write this name down. And so beget so-and-so beget so-and-so. But let's talk just a moment, because the ark is not mentioned, and people are curious about the ark, and I'm also curious about the ark. Are we dealing with a lost ark? That's a good question. 2 Maccabees chapter 2, verses 1 through 8 records the history of what Jeremiah did. This section does anyway. Before the Babylonians took the temple, he went to Mount Nebo, where Moses died, and where Moses saw the promised land, where God let Moses see the promised land. And he went to a big cave in Mount Nebo. He brought with him the tabernacle, the old tabernacle. They still had it. And he also brought the ark and the altar of incense. And he hid them in the cave. And he sealed the cave. And the people that were with him were supposed to see where he did it and mark the spot, but they did not. They did not mark the spot. They couldn't find it. And he said, fine, it's not going to be found until the end, when all things are restored. So everybody's talking about, we're going to find the ark somewhere on the Temple Mount. We're going to find the ark somewhere in Ethiopia or Eritrea. No. If this is true, no, you're not going to find it there. I don't know anybody my entire life that ever said it's on Mount Nebo. Nobody knows. Nobody cares. Nobody reads these things. What are you going to do? So if you want to...
Jeremiah Jones said it was going to be.
Jeremiah Jones or Jim Jones?
No, the Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Yeah, Harrison Ford. Oh my God.
Jeremiah Jones?
No, wasn't that the same?
Indiana Jones.
That's what I said.
Yeah.
Jeremiah, Indiana, whatever.
Now I'm thinking about Robert Redford. Didn't he play Jeremiah Johnson?
Johnson.
See?
Yeah, sorry.
We're all over the road now. All right. So it's in a large sealed cave somewhere in Mount Nebo,
Okay.
waiting to be found. Of course, Revelation says that it's in heaven. He saw the ark in heaven. Well, who knows? Okay, so they're going to, chapters 3 through 6 talk about rebuilding the temple. In the 7th month, they started sacrificing, and they built the seventh month after they returned. they started rebuilding the altar. They began offering the morning and evening sacrifices. Morning and evening sacrifices happen every day at sunrise and sunset. Okay, Exodus 29, 38 through 44. They reinstated the feasts as well. The feasts are listed in Leviticus 23. 2 years later, they began working on rebuilding the temple. So that'd be 533 BC, circa 533. And they were able to lay the foundation, and everyone was there celebrating. There were some people there that were old enough to remember. There were people there that were old enough to remember. I thought it was that Chinese food.
My bag didn't go.
There were people that, hold on, old enough to remember what the temple used to look like. And they were weeping because they were sad to see the state that it was in now. And there were people there who had never seen the older temple who are rejoicing. Okay? And so this is what happened in 533 BC. They laid the foundation. All they've got is 2 years in, and all they've got is a foundation and an altar. Now, there were foreigners in the land ever since the Assyrians came in and took the northern kingdom into exile. You have foreigners in the land, and you also have Canaanites that are still in the land. Well, these foreigners said, "Oh, we'll help you." But they were denied. And they were denied to help because you're not of God and you're not becoming one of us, therefore you cannot help us rebuild this temple. So then, because they were denied, they then put their hands to go against the work of rebuilding the temple. And they used legal channels to do it. They sent letters to the king of Persia to say, "Hey, they're trying to rebel. They're trying to rebel over here." And so the work on rebuilding the temple was halted for 8 years. So 530 to 522 BC, no work was being done. In that time, Haggai and Zechariah were doing their ministry. These are the books of Haggai. This is the Zechariah. This Zechariah is actually the one that is the Zechariah of the book, although there have been other Zechariahs who were prophets. So that work began again in 522 BC as Darius I of Persia let them continue the work after he found Cyrus's decree. So it's been a while now since Cyrus's decree, so he's got to go and see, when did this happen? Did this happen? Because these guys, the foreigners, said, these guys are rebelling, and then these guys said, no, we're not rebelling, we're doing what Cyrus told us to do. And Darius is like, and look at how the correspondence has to go. Okay? So this back and forth, if they had video conferencing, they could have had it done and there'd have been no break. So, but it took a long time to get things done back then. And then once Darius found that, it's like, hey, wait a minute, they can do this. So the temple was finally completed in 516 BC. Still we're not to Ezra until after the temple. Ezra enters the history in the 7th year of King Artaxerxes. Artaxerxes was king in 465 to 424 BC. Ezra petitioned the king. He said, I want to go back. And the king respected Ezra greatly. He gave him the right to go back. He gave him the right to lead a group and to help with the needs of the temple, and that was 458 BC. So this is 50 years later. Or no, 60 years later. 60 years later after it was made. And then Ezra, chapter 7 through 8, he lists the people that joined him. They worried about protection on the way, so they fasted and prayed. Look, they have a long way to go. They're going all the way from Persia to the temple.
I thought that was funny. He said, I can't ask for the armed guards.
Yeah, exactly. That was so cool. But God gave them safety all the way. God was faithful to them. When Ezra gets there, he learns that the exiles have been transgressing Deuteronomy 7, 1 through 4. They've been intermarrying with the people there who are turning their hearts away from God. Can you imagine? Do you know what Ezra has in his mind? Well, I'm going to go to the temple. This is going to be awesome. It's going to be like all the things I read about it that I always teach about. This is his journey to Israel. He's going to the Holy Land. He's so excited, and he gets there and he finds out it's not. It is like what he read. They're turning away from God again. So he tore his clothes. He pulled out some of his hair. He pulled out some of the hair on his head. He pulled out some of the hair on his beard. So he's violently sad about this. And he prayed this great prayer in response to it. And he said, how can you people do this after all we've been through? And God might even wipe out the remnant. Like, how could this happen? You know, the expectation would be we return to the land and then we'll get it right. But that is not the expectation that the prophets had communicated. But the people came and wept, and they pledged to get rid of their foreign wives and their foreign children, to put them back on the straight and narrow. Look at the difficult situation now they've done. They've married these foreign ladies who hate God, and now they have these kids who also hate God, and now they're going to send them away, and it's going to make them continue to hate God. Yeah. Bad situation.
I thought the only reason would be marital unfaithfulness.
Oh, you're talking about within the covenant community. 1 Corinthians.
Are they not covenant community?
No. No, they're marrying pagan women.
No, I know that, but it says that they're willing to stay with you.
Oh, that's in 1 Corinthians 7. That's the New Testament. That's talking about somebody coming to faith in Christ. And so this is different. So this does not apply to them. I'd say the marital unfaithfulness, what applies to them is that they weren't supposed to marry them in the first place. Now if they became a believer, like Ruth. Ruth is a great example. She became a believer. And that's because there's a rule on that as well. If the foreigner is willing to become of the children of God, you must treat them exactly as you would the children of God. So those who want to join will be able to stay. Those who do not want to join legally will leave or be kicked out. Bad situation.
I was relieved to find that they didn't kill him for once.
Yeah.
I thought the end of the book was going to be they were going to kill all the wives and all the children, but they didn't.
Nope.
It doesn't sound like they did that.
So, and then they pledged to send their foreign wives away. What about Nehemiah? Who is Nehemiah? He's in exile. He's in exile in the Persian Empire. He's a Jew in the line of Judah. Ezra was in the line of Levi. Okay, so this one is in the line of Judah. He's the royal cupbearer to King Artaxerxes. He's a trusted man. He's one of his right-hand men, one of the king's right-hand men. Trusted advisor, as well as the one who will take the drink and take the poison if he has to. He's also a leader. He's sent back to rebuild Jerusalem. Not the temple, but Jerusalem. This is an excellent case study in leadership. There are so many principles to be drawn off of the life of Nehemiah. So many. And it's just amazing. He's a good in his methods and the things that he did. He is someone to model your leadership after. And he's also a builder. He's an engineer. Multiple disciplines. Okay? This guy is just well-rounded, rock solid. So around 444 BC, Nehemiah received news from his brother who had been in Jerusalem, and his brother said, man, the temple, or the walls are smashed down and the gates are burned with fire. It's still in the same shape that it's been in ever since Nebuchadnezzar burned it in 586 BC. The temple's there though. Now you have this temple amidst all these ruins. Can you get that picture in your head? And so Nehemiah wept. He mourned, he fasted, and he prayed for days, for many days and many nights. He mourned and he prayed and he fasted. He confessed their sins, and he quoted from Deuteronomy 28 and Deuteronomy 30, saying, Lord, remember, you said that when we're in exile, we remember you and we pray to you, you will restore us. Please do that. But he had acknowledged we deserved it. For all that we did, we deserved it. So his request, Artaxerxes saw him looking all sad, and he said, why are you so sad? He said, well, how can I be happy when the city of my fathers lies in ruins? And so he says, well, what do you want? He said, I want you to write a note saying that I can go back. Well, the cool thing is, if you catch it, it says very quickly, he prayed to God, and then he said, so he quickly prayed to God before he said anything. And you know what his plan is. You know he's going to try to use his position and his influence with Artaxerxes to go back to Jerusalem. And so he says a quick prayer so that he can have success in this thing, and he tells the king, and he gets permission. Artaxerxes gives him what he needs. He gives him legal papers saying, you can go, let it be known. And he's writing to the other leaders throughout the land, let it be known that Nehemiah can go back and rebuild Jerusalem. He has my permission. This is the decree spoken of in Daniel chapter 9 for the rebuilding of Jerusalem. No other decree was Jerusalem to be rebuilt. And rebuilding the temple is not at all the same thing as rebuilding the city, which Nehemiah clearly gets the picture in chapter 1 that it was burned with fire. Had been burned with fire since Nebuchadnezzar's day. So this is the first decree to go and rebuild and restore Jerusalem. And that's what this book is mainly deals with. Artaxerxes also gave him building materials. Isn't that going to be fun? I need some timber to take with me. Just need to take some timber with me all the way back to Jerusalem. Tyre's up here. It's nice to float that down the Mediterranean and then put it on a convoy to take it into Jerusalem. But to go all the way up the Euphrates, all the way down, not an easy trip.
And that was 72 years after the temple was completed.
In 516, the temple was completed.
So 72 years of giving word.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so Jerusalem's been sitting in ruins this whole time. All right, so local Gentile officials were not happy about Nehemiah showing up. Nehemiah kept quiet. Here's a great principle in leadership. He didn't tell anybody what he was there to do. He didn't want to be biased in any direction. He went around, he circled the city, he checked out to see what was going on, what's the situation, and then he was able to talk to people about what he was going to do. The Gentiles tried to stop him, and they accused them of rebellion. It's the same thing they did when they were trying to rebuild the temple. They accused them of rebellion. And Nehemiah told them that it's the same type of people, the Gentiles that are there, Canaanites and non-Israelites that are there, saying, you can't do this. And Nehemiah, I like what he said. He said, you have no portion, no right, and no memorial in Jerusalem. This has nothing to do with you. So, the rest of chapter 2 mentions specific workers and their work. Nehemiah is a great delegator. He lets the people do the thing that they're best at. He lets them do that thing. Nobody's happy doing the thing that they're not good to do, that they're not made to do. It stinks to do that. So when you have the opportunity to help somebody do the thing that they're supposed to do, you should help them do that thing. That's like somebody who's a great teacher, who they say, well, we need somebody to run the evangelistic outreach and go knocking on doors. I'm not good at that. But you're going to head it up. Oh, can I teach something instead? No, we want you to do this. Oh, come on. I used to think I was an evangelist. And then I met an evangelist. I was like, I'm not an evangelist. Evangelists they will share the gospel with the wall if there's nobody else to share the gospel with. They're the ones that are going to go out. When you're at lunch with them, they're going to talk to the waiter. They're going to talk to the waitress. They're going to give them a tract. And then the waiter or waitress is going to be like, maybe. Because people come to know the Lord through these evangelists. They do a great job at it. But he's great at delegating responsibility. So the local Gentiles began to mock them. Chapter 2 through chapter 6. The local Gentiles are mocking them. And the Jews just prayed that it would fall back on them. So they repaid the mocking with prayer. And the wall was rebuilt to half of its height. And they were saying things like, even if a fox jumped on it, he would knock it over. So, but when the wall was half its height, the Gentiles said, we need to attack these people and kill them to stop them from doing this work.
Are these Gentiles formerly known as the foreigners?
Yeah, foreigners. Yeah.
I mean, they were now more grouped together and more defined, it sounds like, because we're calling them by a label.
Yeah, I could have written foreigners.
It's the same people?
It's the same people. Gentiles, foreigners. It's the same people.
And
So,
could have stayed if they had changed their hearts
Yes.
to follow the true God.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because there's a provision in the law for that. In fact, you have to treat them like a brother if they do. That's what God wants. He wants the Gentiles to become part of the family. So Nehemiah found out about their plan, and so he set guards 24 hours, 7 days a week. And he told them, don't be afraid, but remember the Lord. Okay, we're not going to stop the work. We're going to build this wall under duress, under threat of death. And the workers were working under guards with spears. They're ready. They're looking. And then the workers that are working, don't you love it?
I love that picture.
They got a sword in one hand and a brick in the other, or a block in the other. So these people are ready. And so the ones that were going to attack them see this, and there's like, well, there's nothing we can do. We got to figure out something else. And Nehemiah had the people ready to sound the alarm. There were people stationed all over so that if you heard the horn, everybody used to rush to that side. Because half a wall is not going to, people can get over that easily enough. So their next tactic was to take out Nehemiah. Because the strong leader is getting things done, they need to take out Nehemiah. They try to get him to go where they want him to go. Meet us here. He's like, how am I going to stop the work to come and meet you? Forget it. And Nehemiah heard that slavery was going on. He heard that the local Jewish leaders were lending out money to these people so that they could do the work on the city, and people were mortgaging their fields in order to be able to do this. And the people that were lending the money were charging interest and turning them into slaves, and they were keeping the fields. So they were taking the fields right then. Here's your money. That field that you are putting up as collateral is my field now. But the Bible says wrong. Exodus 22, 25 through 27 and Deuteronomy 24, 10 through 13 says you do not charge interest. Here's the deal. If you're going to lend money in Israel, you're not lending it for, if I lend you $100, you pay me back $100. If you say, here's my coat as pledge, give me the $100, I take the coat, I give you the $100, I give you the coat back. If it's the only coat you have. So you still have the coat. They're supposed to do that. Give them the field back. And so Nehemiah came down on them and said, how dare you do this? You're transgressing the law. And they acquiesced, which was good. And this was during famine conditions, to make matters worse. He confronted them and they stopped. So Nehemiah was then made governor of the land. And he's going to keep that governorship for 12 years. And you know what else? Nehemiah was also a worker. And he didn't take his rightful food allowance as the governor. He's right there with them working. What an example. So the Gentiles continue to accuse Nehemiah of rebellion and saying that you're trying to become a king. You're going to build this wall so that you can rebel against Persia. And we're going to tell them. And they hired a false prophet to try and trap Nehemiah. But he saw through what he was lying about. And he called him out on it. He said, you're a liar. Am I going to go hide myself under these conditions as a leader? I am not going to hide. I'm going to stand in the middle. And nothing's going to stop me from doing this work. And none of it stopped the work from being done. And he was very bold. And the wall was completed in 52 days. 52 days. Now the focus is on rebuilding the people. Jerusalem was well protected, but the inside is still in shambles. It's sparsely populated. The buildings are torn down, still from the time that Nebuchadnezzar came in there, and nobody's really living there. Chapter 7 through 10, within there, Nehemiah read the book of genealogy of those who came from Cyrus's time, and then he assembled to see who all's here. So there was a book of, like a manifest of who all came, kind of like you can read who came on the Mayflower, who came on what ship, and then what families, who's left of these people. So he took an account of that. He had Ezra read the law. This is the same Ezra. They're contemporaries of one another. He read it, and others explained it. They explained it, and I love the way it put this. It says, and translated it to them so that it made sense. Because it wasn't enough that they just heard the law. It had to be translated to them in such a way that it made sense to them. And they celebrated the Feast of Tabernacles, which is the Feast of Tabernacles in other places, but here in Leviticus 23 is where you can find all the feasts. And this had not been done in this manner since the days of Joshua, nearly 1,000 years earlier. So they had this holy assembly where everybody rededicated themselves to the covenant of God. So this is similar to like one of those kings that had a revival, like Josiah or Hezekiah. They're having a revival right now. They're rededicating themselves to the Lord. And they signed an agreement. And chapter 10 provides a list of names and their promises for ongoing provisions. But there's a problem. Not many people are living in Jerusalem. Only the leaders are living in Jerusalem. Everybody else has gone up to their cities. The rest of the people are living in different cities around Judah. So if you're going to rebuild a city, it's not going to get rebuilt unless people are there. Nehemiah came up with an idea that 10% of the people that are living outside of Jerusalem are going to have to be forced to move into Jerusalem to repopulate the city. And so chapter 11 lists the key people that are going to move to Jerusalem. Does that make sense? So the city is being rebuilt, but having a wall with a bunch of crumbled down buildings is no good. Especially nobody wants to live there. So he says, you're going to live there. So Nehemiah made certain that temple worship was being handled correctly, and he ordered singers and all those sorts of things, and that's listed in there. After his 12 years away, he returned to Artaxerxes, and he stayed there for a while. Okay, so see here, Nehemiah went from Jerusalem all the way back to Artaxerxes, and he stayed there for a while, and then he came back to check on Jerusalem. He's been gone for a while. How long? I don't know. It just said after some time, which could be any time. This wicked leader named Tobiah, while Nehemiah was away, he was one of the Gentiles that was against them. He weaseled his way because through marriage, one of his family married the high priest. And so Tobiah got his own special house in the temple courts, in the temple courtyard, and his own special stuff. So when Nehemiah came back, he threw his stuff out and he threw Tobiah out. Now the Levites were not getting what they were supposed to be getting according to the law. So a lot of them were not staying in the temple like they were supposed to, because the different offerings coming to the temple that were supposed to go to the Levites to sustain them so that they could do the temple work was being withheld from them. Nehemiah said, what are you people doing? Give them their money, pay them so that they can do the temple service. He also discovered that they weren't following the Sabbath. And so at sundown on the Sabbath, he shut the gates of the city. And here came the merchants who were like, hey, open the gates. He's saying, tell you what, if you ever come here again on the Sabbath, we're going to kill you. They said, oh, okay. So he threatened them so that they wouldn't show up. What's that about?
Following God's direction.
Yeah, they're supposed to be resting. Why not rest, though? Why would you go ahead and open your shop for business?
Because you don't trust
Greed.
God.
Greed? You're not.
You got to provide, so you got to work it.
Yeah. What are we doing wasting all this time? We could be making money.
So does God still want us to have a Sabbath?
How dare you? You have to write a 10-page paper on it now. No, that's a great question. I think there's a legitimate need to have that type of rest. And here we are on the Sabbath working, teaching. So. But are we beholden to the Sabbath? Well, that talks about it in Romans, but do we have time to get off on that rabbit trail? So it says it in Romans, says that one person regards one day over another, and somebody regards them all. To the one, if they're not doing it, they're sinning. To the other, if they're not doing it, they're not sinning. So if you want to celebrate the Sabbath, it began at sundown yesterday, and it ends at sundown today.
I was taking it as Sunday just because of our culture.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, the church culture, which was started we see in the Bible, they met on the first day of the week, which is Sunday, to celebrate the resurrection of Christ.
But it's a day of praising God and recharge and not pursuing dollar.
Yeah. And so mainly in America we do it on Sunday, or mainly in the church we do it on Sunday. If you rest. But we all need the rest. I'll tell you what, I was done prepping for this at 2:30 yesterday. And I basically slept until 6. And then I got up and hung out with the family and then passed out and then woke up at 6 a.m. It was good. Now, of course, so Nehemiah was away. He came back, and he's fixing these things. He's finding that they've already gone back and married foreign wives while he was gone. Their kids couldn't even speak Hebrew. And he forbid the marriages, and he purified them from everything that was foreign.
So how long had it been between?
Yeah, that's the question. I don't know. Well, so Nehemiah was there for 12 years. Okay, here's Jerusalem. Nehemiah was there for 12 years. And then he went back to Artaxerxes, because it was one of Artaxerxes' requirements. He said, how long are you going to be gone? He said 12 years. I said, okay. So he comes back to Artaxerxes for a certain time. And the way that it says in Nehemiah is, after some time I returned. So it was after some time. I think it was probably a few years. Because he's coming back to a mess. So that's the book of Nehemiah, but it ends saying that they've put everything foreign away from them, and now they're walking the straight and narrow. Esther. Who is Esther? Esther's an exile in Persia. She is also an Israelite, but unlike Ezra, who's a Levite, and Nehemiah, who's from the tribe of Judah, she is from the tribe of Benjamin. She's an orphan. Her mother and father are dead. So her uncle Mordecai has adopted her and is raising her as his own daughter.
I thought it was a cousin. I remember thinking it was uncle, but when I read it, it said cousin.
Cousin, uncle. It's the brother of either her mother or father. What else about Esther? Esther is beautiful in form and face. She has a beautiful body and a beautiful face. And she has it for a reason. She's also going to be a wife of King Xerxes of Persia. Xerxes ruled 485 to 465. So if we think chronologically speaking, the story of Esther, which happens entirely in the exile place, happens before Ezra and Nehemiah, but after Cyrus's decree that they could return. Okay? So these happen before Ezra and Nehemiah, but they happen after Cyrus's decree that they can return. So King Xerxes, the Persian king, was having a 7-day feast, and his queen Vashti was also having a feast. And Xerxes was drunk. And then he called for his wife Vashti to come. He sent his servant to go get Vashti because he wanted to show off the beauty of Vashti to all of his friends that were there, or all of his underlings, to show off the beauty of Vashti. And he's drunk. So he's like, oh, you see my wife, man, woo, or one of my wives, because he's got a bunch. So they all do. That's what they do. And she said, forget it. I'm not coming. And this is a big slap in the face of the king. And he thinks, well, he consults the lawyers. What do we do? And they said, this has violated the law. Not just against you, O king, but against all of us, because she has refused the order of the king. And let's also talk about the cultural implication of this. If you allow this to happen, O king, then all of the husbands in all of Persia are going to have all of their wives telling them to go pound sand whenever they're asked to do anything.
Well, yeah.
So you better come down hard, strip her of her title, and then give it to somebody else. And so that's what he did. So she's stripped of her title, and she's no longer going to be a queen, so he needs another queen to take her place. And so after a while, he sends his guys out to go and find a beautiful virgin. And they're just going out throughout the city, throughout the countryside, looking for Cinderella, So, Mordecai's niece, his adopted daughter Esther, was one that was taken because she was beautiful in form and in face. And she found favor in the eunuch. If you ever have a harem, you have to put a eunuch over the harem, you understand. That's just common practice. If you don't have a eunuch, then don't have a harem. I want neither. But Esther and this eunuch really hit it off. And he said, I'm going to tell you all the tricks, because I want you to win this. It's kind of like the first episode, the first season of Bachelor. Yeah. Although, how many contestants are on that? How many bachelorettes? And then it's like, you get one night with the king. To do what? I mean, are you going to...
12-month beauty regimen.
Yeah, after 12 months.
Human cosmetics. Well, I could look that good after 12 months.
That's right, any of us. And so, she became queen in Vashti's place. But she hid the fact that she was a Jew from the king. She didn't want it known. And Mordecai, her uncle, coincidentally, uncovered a plot. He overheard a plot where they were going to kill King Xerxes. And he told Esther, who told King Xerxes, who had the guys killed. And it saved his life. But she gave him the info under Mordecai's name. And Xerxes had... This is the cool thing. Xerxes has a top advisor named Haman. And Haman. Haman. I'll change it to Haman. Haman, the Agagite. Anybody remember who Agag is?
The Amalekite king.
Yeah. He's the Amalekite. No, I just had it on the screen. He's that Amalekite king. Agag was the Amalekite king when Saul was sent he's supposed to wipe out the Amalekites, and Samuel shows up and he's like, what is all this bleating of sheep that I hear? And who is this guy? Oh, this is King Agag. I'm letting him live, Well, Saul didn't kill everybody. God had a reason for killing everybody. Okay, it was for their sins, for one. Because their sins were extremely wicked. And their children were extremely wicked because they had been altogether corrupted by their upbringing. But one of them escaped. And he went on to have a son who had a son who had a son who had a son. Haman comes from that. Oh dear. So, Haman had not forgotten. And so he said, I'm going to find a way to kill all these Jews. And Mordecai was a Jew. And Haman would walk around and people would bow to him because he's the big cheese with the king. He's an advisor and he's worthy of respect. Mordecai would not bow to him because Mordecai had not forgotten. He knows that he's an Agagite. He knows it. So he's not going to bow down to him. So Mordecai, his refusal to bow has made Haman,
So was part of that because he knew the law? Like Mordecai, was he realizing this is the son of someone that Saul should have killed?
Yeah. Yeah, he realized it. Now, I think Mordecai could have bowed to him, and it would have been the right thing to do, just because, you respect, you're in a foreign land. You're in exile. You're not supposed to be all cocky in exile. You're supposed to be repenting and praying to God and not being all proud. Mordecai was being pretty proud here. But that's okay, because God used his pride to tick off Haman. And now Haman says to Xerxes, hey, there's a certain people that follow a strange customs, and he's being coy about it. Okay, he's saying, can I wipe out these insignificant people that are causing trouble all throughout your kingdom? And look, Xerxes is also a delegator, and he says, yeah, I'll take your word for it, Haman, go ahead. It's not too many, right? Nah, not too many.
Have my ring.
Yeah. And the orders went out, and if you notice, it says that the city of Susa was confused. Kill the Jews? Why are we going to kill all the Jews? And this came from Haman and from Xerxes. Of course, Esther found out about it, and she was afraid to go to the king. And Mordecai sent her, because you can't go in front of the king uninvited. If she just walks in to see the king, her husband, says, hey, I got a question, she could be killed. Because you wait for the king to call on you. You don't put yourself in the position of royalty. It's royalty's job to dictate all the rules. Yes?
Wasn't there a movie about Esther?
Yeah, One Night with the King.
Okay.
I don't know if it's accurate. Highly doubtful. Do you know of any Hollywood movie that's ever been
I just
accurate?
remember that one scene though, like it was very dramatic. Like they did it like in slow motion where she's like bowing before him, like what's gonna happen.
Oh, yeah.
So
Yeah.
because I mean, even though she was the queen, she still needed his favor.
Yes, that's right. Exactly right. So Mordecai sent her a message and saying, look, you're going to die with the rest of us. And you have nothing to lose in going to the king. And besides, have you ever considered why it is that you're in the position you're in? Maybe you're in this position for this purpose. And so that's why she was in that position.
I've had that kind of thought when I'm going through really hard times, is that maybe I'm going through this depression or this anxiety for this particular reason, so that later on I can help someone out who's
Yep.
going through that same thing later.
Yeah, absolutely.
Even though it doesn't feel so high.
Not at the time. Yeah, I certainly would not have chosen to listen to my brother-in-law kill himself on the phone. I would have picked something else to do that night. Yeah, October 17th, 2008. All right. So Esther goes before the king, and yeah, it's tense. But you got to understand, Xerxes really likes Esther a lot. And so he allowed it. He's, what would you like, my queen? I will give you whatever you want, up to half the kingdom. Okay, so it could be one of those really tense scenes, like I don't know what he's going to do, but he really loves her a lot. He just said, I'll give you up to half the kingdom. And so she said, okay, king, can you and Haman come tomorrow? Haman, can you all come to a banquet tomorrow? He said, yes, of course, you bet. Why not? So Haman was powerful, but he wanted revenge on Mordecai, and he was building a gallows outside his own house to hang Mordecai on. Okay? And that night, King Xerxes couldn't sleep. And so I guess to help himself sleep, he looked through old records. And he found that Mordecai had never been, and this is that night after Esther doing that. So we have Haman building the gallows, and now you have the king who can't sleep, who's reading that nothing was ever done to Mordecai. So he asks Haman the next day, he says, hey, what should be done for somebody who really did a great service to the king? And Haman thinks, oh, it's me he's talking about. And he's like, oh, you should dress them in a robe that you wore, put them on a horse that you've been on, and let them wear a crown that you've worn. And he's like, cool, let's do that. And should be have someone go in front of them that's proclaiming this is what happens to those who honor the king. He says, let's do that. You know Mordecai? Yes. Yeah, he saved my life. I want you to do all those things, exactly what you said, and I want you to proclaim in front of him. If anybody's had a bad day, it's going to be Haman, okay? So he spends his day doing that. And can you imagine what Mordecai must be thinking? This is awesome. So after that, he rushes home. He's like, you wouldn't believe the day I've had. I had to do this thing for Mordecai. And his wife and his friends say, this guy's going to be the death of you, really. He's going to be the death of you. And then while he's talking about this, saying how angry he is about it, then comes someone to summon him off to, well, at least I have this awesome meeting. It's just me, the king, and one of his queens. I'm so excited. This is going to be great. Okay? Am I on the right slide? I'm not even looking at the slides anymore.
We're in chapter 7 now, right?
He would have had multiple queens,
Yes, they all did.
Sounds like it, Well,
so they were all considered queens?
So you have the primary queen who is going to have the issue is going to be the heir to the throne. And then you'll have like a whole host of secondary queens. Or you'll have somebody who's a high-ranking queen because she is the daughter of King so-and-so from that kingdom over there. So you have your primary queen, you may have some other queens of high honor, and you may have these concubines. I'm thinking that Esther is just a concubine. Okay? So she's not like the queen, you know.
Because she's Lamar.
I don't know if that's the case. It could be. It could be. It's hard to find one way or the other. Herodotus writes about the queen, his main queen, and he has nothing good to say about her. She was very vindictive and a murderer and all these things. Not Vashti. No, some other one, yeah.
Okay.
That's
He just, once he got through Vashti, he stuck with Esther, but you're saying...
He's not a monogamist. You know, if you look at the pharaohs, for example, they all have their queen, and then they'll have these other queens. Every king is like that. You look at Solomon. 700 queens and then 300 lesser queens. They're still queens, but they're concubines. They're secondary wives. He's got a lot of redundancy in his system of backups. He's got a wife for every day of the year.
Almost 3 years.
Yeah, he's got 3 years worth of wives. Let's see, okay, so Haman had to carry that out. And he was so happy to be invited to the banquet. And then he gets to the banquet. He's like, okay, what's going on? And then Esther, of course, says, who is more of an enemy to you, O king, than Haman, who's trying to kill me? Which Haman, I'm sure he spit out his soup as he heard that. And the king orders that Haman be hung on the gallows that Haman built for Mordecai.
Hey, when I read about that, it's not a rope, right?
Well, it could be impaling, yeah. He could have been impaled. Likely he was impaled. Gallows.
The notes, that I read that it wasn't like a rope, like we're used to on gallows. It's impaled on a
Pike.
sharp pike.
Yeah, impaled on a pike. Maybe that can be one of the cards in Erica's game. Impaled on a pike. So Esther approached the king for a second time, probably a lot more boldly. Yes, I'll give you whatever you want up to half the kingdom, he said again. And she said, can you save my people? He said, yeah, of course I'll save your people. And so Xerxes had the decree go out saying that if anybody attacks the Jews have the right to kill them. And so that's what they did. Anybody who tried to attack the Jews, they had been given the right to defend themselves and to kill anybody that tried to attack them. And the fear of the Jews came on the people, and a lot of people became Jews after that.
Is Xerxes the same thing as Ahasuerus?
Yes.
Maybe.
That would be the Hebrew version. The Greek version is Xerxes. So we could say either. when you read Josephus, you find, or when you think about these names, Xerxes, Artaxerxes, when you think about royalty and the way that royalty is named, there's a lot of similarities. The name will be used, it becomes almost like a general application of who's going to be the new Xerxes, who's going to be the new Darius. Because Darius is Dariush, which is the Lord King, the King of Kings, the Dariush. And so, but it can also be a name. Just like in England, they take royal names, okay? And royal names could be somebody specific that came before.
So the house Haman was given to Esther.
Yeah. Yep.
So did she live in it?
Probably. Yeah.
So she didn't live in the...
She didn't live in the palace, no. So she's not the queen. She's a queen. So... But Xerxes saved the Jews, of course, and Mordecai got Haman's old job. That should have been the last thing that Haman saw. Here comes Mordecai going, "Hey, man!" Yeah. You didn't leave a desk manual about what I'm supposed to do. So when they were saved, when the Jews were saved from their destruction, ever since then, they have the special holiday called Purim. And Purim is what celebrates their salvation from Haman. Thus ends Esther. And this incredibly long section.